Cacti were my first true plant love. As a little kid, I had a row of them along the windowsill. Cute little things which, well, sadly they're not with us anymore. But it probably explains my psyche, why I'm just so obsessed with these plants and why I just keep getting more and more and more of them until they fill every single space around me. I don't know what I'm gonna do. Now, I've got so many plants and they're all growing really well. So today, I'm gonna talk to you about them as give them a bit more space in their pots. Talk about how they grow, look at a few choice varieties and, well, take a meandering wander through the wonderful world of cacti. So I hope you'll join me. Let's have a look at these amazing plants. Now I've got 3 different types of cacti that I'm going to be looking at and repotting today. I've got some tiny little baby seedlings. These are 1 year old. You might remember these from my mutant cactus video. I've got some that are a little bit more mature and they're going to need a bit more space if they're going to start putting on any size. And then maybe I'm a bit deranged, but I'm also going to try and repot this, hopefully without absolutely destroying myself in the process. Now, what do we need? Well, goes without saying, as always, soil mix. Depending on the type of plant, I'll be using different soil mixes today. I'll talk you through them when I get there. We are going to need pots. Now, I picked up a big pile of pots for free at Bunnings, which is the Australian equivalent of like a Home Depot. They do a pot recycling thing. Probably looked a little bit crazy carrying a pile about 1.5 meters high towards my car, but it is what it is. Free is free. Ever trusty toothbrush if I need to clear any debris off roots. Tweezers, because you never know when you're going to need them. Then of course I got plants and maybe I'll use gloves. Maybe I won't. We'll see what happens to my hands, hey? This could turn into cactus comedy hour. Anyway, that's what we've got. Let's get into it and start having a look at some of these plants. So the first thing we're going to be repotting are these Trichocereus pachanoi. Mutant seedlings. They are about 1 year old, like I said, and well, you can see in the pot, they're all starting to get up in each other's faces. So, time to give them their own pots and let them step out into the world as individuals, I say. Now, I am an absolute sucker for mutant cacti. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to just kind of squeeze the pot, loosen up these roots, see if I can get them out, try not to spike my hands in the process, separate them and we'll go from there. I love mutant cacti. I don't know why, but when you think about the strange and wonderful world of succulents, the fact that it's so easy and surprisingly common for these plants to mutate, I just find very, very odd. It's an interesting thing. Cacti and succulents, I think statistically, produce far more mutant offspring than any other plant type. Not really sure if there's any research into why. Look at that, there we go, got it out of the pot. We can start separating these. Now, you try to be fairly delicate with the roots. This soil's a bit moist, which isn't necessarily ideal, but there we go. So we separate these out. Now, these are all seed grown, which for a lot of plants, the ability to grow mutant straight from seed, I suppose, reflects, well, a very rare thing, which is why it's so wonderful that cacti, if you're into this kind of thing anyway, can grow mutant straight from seed if you get the right seed source. And so there we go, we separate them all out. Now I'm not going to pot them all up for you straight up, but let's take this fantastic little one. This is a cristate or crested specimen. You can see what that means is that the growth point, rather than being from one central point, it's actually turned into almost a kind of a line that runs along the top of the plant, and it'll grow out in a really kind of fascinating fan pattern. Quite stunning. You never know with these mutants exactly what they're going to do. Will they go crested? Will they kind of turn into these strange melty columns? they might do all of them in one plant. That's the joy of it, the uncertainty. So what we're going to do, we're going to get our pot, we're going to get our plant. That's probably not the same one that I just put down, but that doesn't matter. And unsurprisingly, we get our soil mix. Now, the soil mix that I'm using for these plants, a little bit more rich than what I use for most of my succulents. Typically, I like 80% minerals or inorganics to about 20% organic material. But Trichocereus, they don't mind putting on a bit of size, and they don't mind slightly more organic soil. So this is 50-50. Well draining, of course, because of the inorganic gritty component. In this case, the gritty component is made up of pumice, zeolite, bit of sandstone, bit of granite, that sort of thing. But the organics enable them to start putting on a bit of size, and they will appreciate that. Where they grow, it's not really a particularly arid area. They come up in the mountains in South America, and the rainfall there, not necessarily a rare thing. So I'm going to pot every single one of these absolute stunners up individually. Won't make you watch me do the whole process. Then we'll move on to the next thing, hey? And there we have it. One of 11 beautiful little mutant Trichocereus, now in their own individual pots. Now these plants are destined to go into a bit of a filtered light position here in the greenhouse. Eventually they'll be able to cop the beating Sydney sun, but certainly not now. When they get too much light, they start getting a bit stressed, and you can see this one here already has probably got a little bit more than it needs. They turn kind of a reddy maroon colour, in some stages even kind of purple if they get too much light. Doesn't cause them too much damage, just really slows down their growth rate. It's a loss of that photosynthetic chlorophyll which essentially enables them to grow. But give them enough time. If you're not in a rush, they will kind of grow out of it and won't pose too many problems. If you are in a rush, of course, well, sucks, but I don't know. What do you need these plants to grow quickly for? Maybe because they're one of those kind of fundamental ethnobotanical plants which a lot of people seem to enjoy recreationally. I'm talking about drugs, of course. And, well, speaking of which, another plant I'm going to be repotting, or at least getting out of its pot today. Can't really see them. Some little baby Lophophora williamsii. That is peyote cactus. So let's dig them up now and see what we got. These are plants that typically grow, I believe, in Mexico and in southern Texas, and they're kind of pronounced, of course, very well known popularly as being a source of mescaline, that hallucinogenic drug. It's not really why I grow them. I think they're quite beautiful in their own right. They had these really quite enormous tap roots, and that's what I'm trying to dislodge right now. These are plants that I've grown pretty hard. What that means is don't give them a lot of love, a lot of care. They grow in a very inorganic soil, as you can see as I tip it out. They're mostly seemingly pumice and zeolite in this instance. And so they grow very slowly. I'm sure if you give them a little bit more love and a little bit more moisture and a bit more inorganic material, organic material I should say, they'll grow more quickly. But again, I'm not in a rush. I'm not going to be chewing on these things anytime soon. However, these are plants that I think are probably deserving of a little bit more space, maybe their own individual pots. Now, you can see that plant now out of there with that very, very thick taproot. Unbelievable, absolutely stunning. Just a little one. I don't know how many years old this is, but a couple of years old, this plant. And you can see that little peyote button at the top. Now, I'm not going to be putting these plants into pots. These are the sorts of plants with these thick, fleshy taproots that, well, you put them into soil, and if there's any pathogens, any sort of moisture in that soil, well, you'll find rot gets in quite easily, and that'll be the end of them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to clear off, just gently with my fingers, I'm going to clear off any of the old soil from there. do that with all of them. I could use a toothbrush for this. I know some people would advocate even trimming the roots, and I have done that in the past, but I'm not going to really worry too much about that today. And the reason I'm doing this is to give them a fresh start on life. I'm going to put them each into their own individual pots, but what I'm going to do is give them some time to heal, because this process, well, it's a fairly stressful one for them. And like I said, put them into soil, they will get rot into them pretty easily. So they're going to sit out now in a shaded, very dry position for about 7 days, maybe 2 weeks. They'll be completely fine as long as I keep them out of the sun. They will burn quite quickly if that root gets exposed. Put them in a sheltered position, let them dry out, and that'll actually let any tiny micro wounds that have come up as a result of this process to heal over. But I'm not going to neglect you completely. These are plants that when I do pot them up, I won't be using the same soil mix that I use, say, for a trichocereus, because they come from far less moist regions. We're talking about plants that really enjoy a more arid environment. And because of that, I'll be giving them a soil mix that is much more inorganic. You can see there, that's that beautiful 80% to 20% inorganic to organic mix that I love using for all my succulents. Sandstone, pumice, granite, zeolite, a little bit of vermiculite in there, and then some store-bought cactus mix. So for now, these little beauties, they're going on a shelf, get potted up a little bit later on into their own individual pots. Probably give them a deeper pot, that tall maybe, just to accommodate those fleshy taproots. It's peyote for you. Now I'm going to look at some bigger, more tall growing, slightly more mature plants. So let's get into that now. Now I want to give you a bit of variety here. So I've picked out a few different species that, well, they grow in very, very different ways. I suppose to highlight the wonderful variety of forms and shapes that cacti come in. So what I've got for you, something that grows very tall. I've got a few things that grow very low, creeping along the ground even. Something that stays small but spiky. And then, well, just because I can't resist, another absolutely wonderful mutant that is absolutely dying for a little bit of a refresh in terms of its soil. So let's start with the tall thing. This plant here, this is a 1-year-old Cephalocereus, what are you called? Cephalocereus columna trajani. These are plants from Mexico, and they grow in one single tall column, but they kind of dot the hillsides in their natural habitat, turn into these almost like these quite impressive cacti forests. Now this is a plant, like I said, it's going to need a bit more space in its pot if it's going to start putting on a bit of height. And so that's what we want to do. So we're going to take one of these pots. I think they're about 10 centimeters. No, 14 centimeters. Doubling its size. Look at that. There's going to be quite a significant increase in terms of the soil mass that it'll be able to grow into, which is going to be fantastic. So I'm going to preload this pot, put this plant into it, and we'll go from there. I'll be back in a sec. All right, so I've got some soil in the pot. Let's see if Cactus Comedy Hour begins here as I try to get this out of its old pot into a new one without using gloves. Again, giving the root ball a bit of a squeeze just to loosen it up. It's in there pretty tightly. Now, often you read on the internet, the advice is kind of increase pot size for cacti in very small steps. You know, be conservative. They don't like to be over potted. But really, that's advice that is certainly true of your miniatures, of your tiny little globular cacti. But these giant columnar plants, if you don't give them enough root space, really restricts their growth. There we go, out it comes. And so you want to make sure that when you do pot them up, you give them ample space, and as those roots are enabled to kind of grow outwards, it enables the plant to put on vertical height quite significantly. Don't give them enough root space, you're really going to be stunting your plants. So there we go. Now, one thing that we need to be wary of, this is a plant that's been sitting out in full sun, and its colours kind of bear witness to that. It's a little bit stressed on one side compared to the other. When I do pot this up, I'm going to want to make sure that when I put it back in its position, that side that's been exposed to full sun, this more yellow side, maintains its position. Because if I turn it around and I give this green side full sun, it's going to sunburn straight up, no doubts about it whatsoever. So it's actually built a bit of sun resistance on this yellow side. That yellowing is again another stress reaction, and we want to take advantage of that. So I'm going to put some soil in this pot. I'll be back to finish up with Cephalocereus columna trajani. What a strange and obscure plant, just how I love them. And there we go. A little bit wobbly in its pot, but as it beds down those roots, that'll take care of itself. Going from one very tall single column plant to, well, in my opinion, the opposite. Columnar cacti that stay very low to the ground, and there's nothing more true to that than the iconic Stenocereus aruca. Which grows in Baja, Mexico. Now these are, I suppose, nicknamed the creeping devil for very good reason. The way that they don't grow up, they grow along. And what I mean by that is essentially these plants, well, they stick to the ground. They send out roots from their trunk when they get bigger, of course. These ones are just tiny little babies. They send out roots from their trunk straight into the soil, and over time, the tail end of the plant kind of, I suppose, deteriorates, rots away, goes back into the earth as it grows forward. And so the single plant actually creeps over time across the ground. An absolutely stunning growth form, and very strange, and therefore incredibly irresistible to someone who, well, loves their plants as weird as they can get. So I've got some Stenocereus aruca, but also, not to be outdone, I have a pair of creeping cacti from South America. These are Peruvian cacti. This is Hagioserius decumbens. And if you see photos of this plant in habitat, similar sort of thing, but it's just this cactus kind of growing, almost emerging out of the sand dunes. Absolutely stunning as it kind of crawls its way across the ground. And this one, Hagioserius tenuis. This is an absolute bizarre oddity, described by some as the most endangered cactus in the world. Grows in a very small area, very restricted space, about 2 square kilometers, not too far from Lima in Peru. And, well, they're like little fingers, little spiny fingers that crawl across the deserts in their habitat. And, well, there's all sorts of strange biological things about these plants that I can't comprehend. Apparently, they can reproduce asexually through flowers, whatever that means, but someone might know. You can leave me a comment if that makes any sense to you. Anyway, so these 3 crawling, creeping, low-growing columnar species, let's repot them now. They're all going to get a bit of a bigger pot. I'll give the Stenocereus pots of this size, and the 2 Hagioseriuses. I must add, I am an absolute freak for Hagioserius as a genus. Don't know why, just they're so good. They're going to go into the bigger pots. So leave me with it for a second, and actually no, let's take the Stenocereus out, and again see if I can avoid getting any spines into my fingers as I do this. We'll get that old gritty soil out, give them a bit of a refresh. You'll note I'm not really using the toothbrush today so far anyway. I haven't really come across anything that I think is particularly troublesome in the soil, and so if I can avoid disturbing the roots, all the better. Right, there we go, there's one, and here we go, another one. Getting them without getting spined, it's really a matter of grasping them at the base. There we go, there's another one. And well, while we're at it, let's just do the rest of them, shall we? This is going to prove a little bit more difficult because this is a little bit more spiny. Hagioserius decumbens, sensational. And the spines on Hagioserius tenuis are kind of a bit wiry. They're not particularly spiky, so this one I reckon I can do pretty easily. Again, loosen up. This feels pretty well bedded in there. And there you go. All right, time to pot these little bad boys up. Our trio of creepy crawlies now all wonderfully given a little bit more space to work with, which will make them very happy. Going to move on now to a little round globular cactus. This one is called Gymnocalcium cardinasianum. Now, gymnocalciums are pretty common in cultivation. You can find them in nurseries and garden centres and those sorts of places. And you know, the little red ball moon cactuses that you find grafted onto dragon fruit are a species of Gymnocalcium. That's Gymnocalcium mihanovicii. This one, a little bit less common. And well, maybe the thing that makes me love it so much is the thing that makes it less common. Because this is a species of plant which you can see even in its infancy, those massive spines. And well, there's one thing I love about cacti, it is those insane heavy metal spines that they grow. Gymnocalciums, the common wisdom with them is that they don't necessarily need a lot of sun. But conversely with cacti, the stronger the sunlight they receive, the more their spination comes out. You get the thicker, longer, more densely packed spines when they're grown in full sun. So just as an experiment, this guy's been living quite happily, I might add, out in the full blasting Sydney sun and seemingly loving it. And you can see those spines really responding to that, even as a small plant. So we're going to get this one out of its pot. I'm going to give it just a little bit of an up pot this time. That old wisdom, small cacti, small pot increase. That's what's happening here, because this is not a plant that's going to grow into a monster column. Plant that comes from Bolivia. All right, there we go. Out it comes with its roots. Just clear that off. The old toothbrush also doubles as a great way to clean dirt from between cactus spines. There we go, look at that. What an absolutely beautiful little plant that is. I'm so excited. Cannot wait to see this get bigger and get more dense, insane, devilish spines. So here we go into its pot. Now, this week I had a question in the comments about reusing old soil. And I feel like it's pretty pertinent to raise it now, because the soil mix that I'm actually using for these cacti does include some recycled old media. When do I use old media? Well, typically it's with plants that, well, you know, as much as I love them, they're not that hard to replace. If I've got a plant which is very rare, very expensive, generally speaking, I'll avoid reusing any of the old media because I don't want any potential old pathogens that are in the old soil to carry across and cause damage. I don't expect there's anything wrong with this old soil, but you just don't want to take a risk. Plants like this though, seeds, very easy to get for a plant like this. Only takes a couple of years to grow it, and you know, the risk therefore is minimal. So reusing old soil. And of course, the wonderful benefit of reusing old soil is sometimes, particularly if you're using old seed mix, you get random little passengers in your pots. Plants that, well, they germinate long after you expected them to, and you get a bonus. I'll show you in a second. I've got, it's not a cactus, but a pot with a Hoodia gordonii and a slepiad from southern Africa, which in itself was beautiful, but then it had a little seedling of Adenia metamorpha, which is probably a $500 plant come up in it. Absolutely insane. Anyway, there's this. I'll go get that Hoodia and show you what I got. Where is it? Here we go. They look like cacti, so that's my justification. So you can see, Hoodia gordonii, absolutely beautiful. And then here, that there, there's a Adenia metamorpha, an absolutely stunning cordiciform plant from Madagascar. And like I said, get that big, that's worth an absolute packet. So there are financial advantages to reusing media as well. Anyway, I'm going to go put the succulents away because it's not the time for them. We're talking cactuses right now, and I still got more to show you. Here we go. This is Mammillaria boccasana Fred. I love the cultivar name from this. Again, featured in my mutant cactus video released a few months ago. Check it out if you want to. But this is a plant I've had for a very long time, and I've actually propagated from it many times, which is why it's much smaller than it could be. But it is a plant that is, I think, in desperate need of a soil refresh. Look at that. Probably been in the same soil for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. Probably a bit tired, run out of nutrients, ready to go. And this is from when I used to put shade cloth at the bottom of my pots, as you can see. Now, Mammillaria boccasana in itself is, I suppose, an interesting cactus. Beautiful little fluffy thing, and gets little tufted, tiny little flowers. And of course, Fred, its mutant cousin, brother, whatever you want to call it, is this weird kind of globular, very almost rubbery, squishy thing. Look at this, you give it a bit of a squish and it, you know, gives. It's fantastic. There are different forms of Freds, which I suppose makes them an interesting collectible, but I've only got the one, and I'm not going to do any more propagating from this plant, so I'm just going to let this one grow out into old age. Generally speaking, these are regarded as fairly sensitive plants, and I can understand why. You give them too much water and they do have a tendency to rot, which is why, generally speaking, we want to be a bit careful with them. But in this case, I think they'll do well with a bit more of a rich soil, because I think this plant can get much bigger. I'm not going to put it in too big a pot, but I do want to get some of the soil off the roots, because like I said, I think it's probably exhausted most of the nutrients in this plant, and I think it will react well if I freshen it up. So I'm just going to clear away some of the fairly compacted old soil. It has been years and years. Often, I think when you have so many plants, sometimes some of them just get a bit neglected because they don't give you much trouble. And this is one of those plants which hasn't given me a lot of trouble over the years. All right, that'll do. Loosened up the root ball. That'll be a bit happier now. All right, I'm going to go into a big pot like this one as well. So let's do that, and I'll be back in a sec. So there we go. Fred's going to be a whole lot happier now. He's got a bit more room to move his roots, and a soil update with some more nutrients in it. Last time I shared Fred, had quite a few people, I think, surprised by the name. They thought that Fred was a nickname that I'd given this one particular weird mutant plant, when in actual fact that's the recognized cultivar name, which I think is pretty funny. Shows a wry sense of humor by whoever found and named this plant. How good's that? Now, I've only got one more plant to go, and it's the one that sort of been dreading. I've got a huge pot ready to go and a huge plant ready to go. I'm going to try and do this without stabbing myself too badly, and then we'll finish up. All right, here we go. Cactus geometricans, up potting time. Wish me luck. Now, am I a lunatic for trying to do this today? Probably yes, but we're going to take this Cactus geometricans and put it into that, I think, more attractive and certainly larger yellow pot. Now, I originally got this plant from the rescue plant section of my local nursery. It was just one single column, didn't have these offsets at its base. And well, you can see what was going on with it. This one column, which originally had quite formidable spines, over time must have been placed into a more shady, less exposed position, and you can see this regression in the size of the spines and a thinning of the trunk, all signs of etiolation, which essentially means that the plant wasn't getting as much light as it prefers. Took it home, gave it a bigger pot, found it a spot in a brighter position, giving it that full sun that they prefer, and you can see the wonderful glaucous new growth, the blue, that deep blue, wonderful powdery colour that this plant is known for, and of course a return to the monster spines all over it. It's also got some wonderful little offsets down here, which you know, maybe one day I'll chop off and propagate. I don't know. Anyway, so this plant coming out of this pot, going into this one. Now, before we start, have a look at this pot. It's got a decent sized drainage hole at the bottom, and well, we want that absolutely, but it's big enough that we might lose some of our soil media through it. So simple solution. Got a bit of fly screen that's going to go at the base of the pot just to cover that hole. And that'll stop any of the soil mix from over time disappearing out the base. So I'm going to figure out roughly how much I need to put in this pot at the base before we get this out, and probably end up in a lot of pain and blood everywhere all over my nice white shirt. But here we go. I'll be back in a sec with a half-filled pot. Right, here we go. Now, there are far more sensible ways of getting this out of its pot. You could use newspapers, you could use, I don't know, rolls of foam. I'm sure you could use all sorts of things. I've seen great videos telling you how to get very spiky cactuses out of their pots and relocate them. Do not take my advice today. Do not do what I'm doing. This is insanity. We're using gloves and nothing else. So, here we go. Oh, come on, plant. Trying not to damage the plant as we do this, but it is coming up gradually. I can just see this springing free and landing on my head. So, also trying to avoid damaging myself. The problem is it's also terracotta, and so the pot itself is probably attached to the roots. Add to the fun, looks like there's a bit of an ant's nest in here. So now they're all swarming up. Yikes, get off me. All right, this is going to be so much more fun than I expected. All right, here we go. Come on. Come on, here we go, here we go. And, oh, we're up. And we're in. Magic. Somehow haven't been spiked, haven't had ants swarming all over me. The power of semi-live television. All right, now I need to backfill this pot because this thing is not at all stable. But the good news is we got it out of its old one. It's ready to go. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to brush the ants off me. I'll be back in just a moment. In fact, why don't I just show you, because I'm not going to use a scoop. This is a big bundle of soil for the sake of everything easy, I'm just going to tip that in there. Try to avoid breathing in all that dust. You probably should have a mask on. Maybe this is a video of what not to do. All right, just backfilling that in, nice and easy. I'll need a bit more in a second. I'll turn the pot around and do it from the other side. This is going to be quite heavy. I'm going to be moving it to another part of the yard. Probably would have made more sense to do it there, but hey, the power of positive thinking, hey? All right, a little bit more soil going in this side. Okay, here we go. And now, like I said, just going to level that all out. Give it a bit of a pat down to make sure it's happy. The soil level is a little bit below the rim of the pot here. That should work out pretty nicely. And now, if I can lift this, I'll show you how the finished product looks. All I need to do now is drop it, right? So there you go. Myrtillo cactus, geometricans, and what I think is quite a striking pot. It's going to go to its new home elsewhere in the garden, if I can get it there, and hopefully live quite a happy and long life and not need repotting again in quite some time. Now I'm absolutely roasting here and completely buggered, so it's time for a cold drink and a lie down. If you've got any comments or questions about cacti or indeed any plants, leave me a comment. You're also quite welcome to subscribe if you find that sort of thing interesting. There's a link on the screen. Follow that link, you can find some sick merch like this. I've also got some stickers available. If you're in Australia, you can buy plants from me. Or you can follow me on Instagram. It's all through that link. For now though, time to take this to its forever home. Happy gardening, and I'll see you next time.